Hello, everybody. My name is Benjamin Day,
And I am Jillian Mason.
and this is Medicare for All, the podcast for everybody who needs healthcare. Our little
Mhm.
intro music gets me so calm and relaxed. I have to work myself up into podcast intro frenzy. Well, so Jillian, as you know, last week was the summer equinox. The sun is
Yes.
blazing, and we have only one thing on our minds:
Mm.
the upcoming 30th anniversary of the high-octane, expertly paced thriller, The Fugitive,
Yay!
which was released August 6th, 1993. So that anniversary is just around the corner, starring our favorite Harrison Ford.
Mm.
Oh, and Medicare for All also on our mind. We are always thinking about Medicare for All here on the podcast. But now that you mention it, or now that I mention it, isn't it funny how if we had a single payer healthcare system, the whole plot of The Fugitive literally couldn't exist.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
Under Medicare for All, there would have been no nefarious pharmaceutical executive to frame Harrison Ford for murder in order to cover up the side effects of Provasic.
Provasic.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And there would have been no need for Walter White in a different show to cook meth in order to pay for his cancer treatment from Breaking Bad, of course. In fact, a lot of our favorite movies and TV shows would be entirely without conflict. So, in this episode, we're going to take a look at kind of a uniquely American subgenre, movies where our healthcare system is the villain. And we are going to dip into the Healthcare Now mailbag to hear from our listeners about their favorite movies where the for-profit healthcare is the bad guy. It turns out there's plenty to work with.
Oh my God. I love this topic so much. I just in general like looking at movies from perspective that the director may not have intended,
Mm-hmm.
This always reminds me of my partner teaches English, and he was teaching English to a group of students who were all nursing students.
Mm-hmm.
And but it's an English class, right? So he wants to expose them to some of the finer things in life, and he shows them this 1960s very abstract, obscure art film from Sweden. By Ingmar Bergman, called Persona. It's one of the most probably one of the greatest films of all time. It's an exploration of the the difference between self and other and identity. It's about this woman who goes to an island, an isolated island, with her nurse, and over their time on the island, the two of them, their identities blur to the extent that they no longer know who is who. So John goes into class and he's like ready to discuss this film and ready to unpack all of these, issues, the philosophical issues here, the abstractness of the film or whatever. And he walks in and he says, okay, students, what did you think? And they're all like, that woman was a really terrible nurse.
That sounds like my kind of film criticism. Just totally unwashed, uncultured reaction. This is why I stick to the dumb Marvel films, Jillian. I'm glad you're here.
I mean, this is just to say that, maybe those students were missing the point of Persona, but maybe those students picked up on
We're
something
on to something
that was important. So maybe looking at healthcare in these movies is the way to go, and it's going to uncover lots of interesting stuff.
We all experience bad nursing more often than we bleed our personas with other people, probably.
I mean, it depends on the way that you think about self and other. It's clear.
Or the island you're stuck on.
Oh my. But so all of this is to say that we're very excited to be looking at healthcare in the movies. And of course we want to start with The Fugitive, 1993, a beautiful year. What were you doing in 1993, Ben Day?
Oh, sweet Jesus.
Here's a hint. We were 14 years old.
14. Okay. All right. I was probably on the verge of failing out of high school. That was when I was 15. Right. So I was still at my public school that I essentially was failing out of, and then I went to this very radical alternative school where the kids run the school through a democratic system. But that is the topic probably for another podcast.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
Beat that. How was your number 3?
Well, when I was 14, I was in suburban New Jersey and mostly going to the movies. So
Okay.
I
All right.
remember being in the theater and watching The Fugitive, which was amazing. For
Wow.
those who do not remember The Fugitive, it did star Harrison Ford and also Tommy Lee Jones. Fun fact, Tommy Lee Jones, former college roommate of Al Gore. Who knew?
Who knew?
Um, regardless, so this movie is all about Dr. Richard Kimball. It's basically on a true story, but the true story doesn't have the nice big pharma angle that we're interested in. So basically, Harrison Ford is falsely accused of murdering his wife, but he knows that he didn't do it. He knows that a one-armed man did it. And so the entire plot of the film is about him escaping police custody, becoming the fugitive, as it were, and chasing down this one-armed man who killed his wife. And I think that honestly, at the time, that's all I really thought about in the movie. I was like, oh, wow, the villain here is the one-armed man. They got to get the one-armed man. But then at the end, there's this big twist. Do you remember?
No. Hit me with it. I have watched the movie, but it has been a long time.
Oh my God. I love this movie so much. I watch it on a regular basis. Okay. Well, what happens is that it turns out that the one-armed man wasn't acting alone, Ben. Instead, he was being bankrupted by Big Pharma. And they were looking to frame Richard Kimball, Harrison Ford, our guy, Harrison Ford. They were looking to frame him so that they could force a drug to sale before it had passed its tests. And so they could pad their profit margins. So,
and this was before Trump was president. Do you remember that? This is exactly what happened with that COVID drug, the fake COVID treatment that was like rushed through. And it's like, oh, it actually hurts people and it doesn't help you with COVID at all. Sorry.
Yeah. It's just like that, except in 1993. So it's a pretty terrific movie. I think everyone should watch it. It has the amazing Tommy Lee Jones, who actually won the Academy Award for Best Acting in a Supporting Role. And it is a movie that is completely animated by how shitty our healthcare system is and how the profit motive is really what is the origin of evil in our society.
Right. Which clearly even resonated back then. So, Jillian, I thought what we would do, and again, I'm going to lean heavily on your movie and cultural critic expertise here.
Thank you.
But obviously, we got some great help from our supporters who we asked them about movies and TV shows that they have watched, that they like, that rely heavily on, healthcare crisis as kind of a turning point or a villain. So we thought we'd start back in the 1970s, and it seemed like most of the submissions we got earliest point were in the 70s. And I think that this is not an accident. The term healthcare industry dates back to the 1970s. And it was really, modern medicine is not that old, more like 1950s and 1960s. That's the first time we had prescriptions. That's the first time like evidence-based medicine emerged. And a lot of healthcare was kind of charitable organizations, religious, church-owned hospitals and healthcare providers. Really, when it became this commercial enterprise where people are trying to make money off the backs of patients, dates back to starting, especially in the 1970s. And then again, like I said, that's when the whole phrase, the healthcare industry, emerged. So there was a major transformation of the healthcare system happening. We were having real life villains emerge in real life before they were reflected in the film. And I think just kind of this growing widespread experience that people were having with like crazy high healthcare costs rising through the roof. That's where they started really hitting unaffordable rates. Just the experience, a real life experience of healthcare dystopia then created like this audience for Hollywood scriptwriters to build drama around healthcare situations. And they know that people are going to understand what it's like to go through that. So Jillian, let's start with a couple of films from like the very beginning of the so-called healthcare industry back in the early to mid 1970s.
Well, a good one to start with, I think, is The Hospital from 1971. It's a movie about a hospital.
Sounds like a Kafka novel or something. The Castle.
Sounds like what?
A Kafka novel, like The Castle, or
in fact, it is very similar to that. It does depict the Kafkaesque nature of modern healthcare. It's got George C. Scott and Diana Rigg, who are both quite excellent in this movie. But mostly it's the plot of this movie that deserves a mention, right? So this is about a hospital that is sort of getting used to running as a business, and there are some serious challenges, right? The hospital's inefficient. They keep having all of these different problems that are related to staffing and budget cuts, et cetera, et cetera. So we come in on that, and there are lots of, you can tell this is a moment of transformation in the healthcare industry because there are lots of old white men moaning and bitching about the old days and how much. But okay, so here's the plot of this movie. It is wild. So a serial killer becomes embittered at the doctors at this hospital, right? And decides to target them, right? He does not want to actually kill them, though, right? He's a man of God, it turns out. And so he's not interested in actually killing them. What he does is he makes them patients at their own hospital and allows them to die through the inefficiencies of the hospital.
Brilliant.
So so he knocks one guy on the head and leaves him unconscious in the emergency room and just, lets people ignore him to death. He gets a doctor to fall asleep in one of the patient's beds, and he's administered the wrong he shouldn't be administered any drugs because he's the doctor, not a patient. Anyway, the point is, the serial killer allows the hospital to kill its own doctors.
Right. So is he the serial killer, or are the hospitals the serial killers?
Boom. That's the question.
Those are really bad nurses. No, sorry. Not the right takeaway.
So that is a wild plot line. I just want you to know about it. The movie itself has some weird sexual politics in it, so if that's a trigger for you, you might want to avoid that. It is from 1971, which was a time period of weird sexual politics. So I just need you to know that this movie existed.
It seems to be kicking off a genre of revenge fantasies revolving around the healthcare industry. So
yes. And revenge fantasy is my favorite kind of movie. So I'm excited that we get to talk about
it. All right. More to come.
Another kind of subgenre in the healthcare film was, you can see in, let's see, what's a good example from the 70s? How about Dog Day Afternoon, right? This is a fantastic Al Pacino movie. Al Pacino ends up robbing a bank. This is actually based on a true story of these two guys in Brooklyn. And basically they're Sonny and Sal, right? And they attempt a bank heist that turns sour and basically turns into a hostage situation, a standoff with the police, yada, yada, yada. And it basically unravels what exactly the motivations are. And it turns out that the reason that Sonny actually wanted to rob this bank is to pay for gender reassignment surgery for his partner.
And it turns out gender affirming care has been terrible for a long time as well.
Yes. I mean, if you can just imagine, it's difficult enough to get gender affirming care in 2023 in this country. If you can imagine 1975.
Yeah, seriously.
Rough.
I think that I had two reactions when I saw this one listed. Some folks mentioned this one. One, if your names are Sonny and Sal, don't try to rob a bank. It's not going to go well. But two, it triggered this little memory from recent news, and I tracked it down. Very recently there was a guy in Detroit, Brian Randolph, who actually robbed a bank to pay for his 1-year-old daughter's cancer treatment. And just recently his insurance plan had canceled his daughter's coverage saying that they had just like filled out the paperwork wrong, if
Mm.
that sounds familiar. And she had a sort of very important treatment coming up. And so he literally robbed a bank and used it to restart his insurance plan.
Jesus.
So fact or fiction, you be the judge.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it didn't turn into a showdown or anything that dramatic. He was just caught later and then charged and sentenced and sent to jail. So now his daughter doesn't have a dad.
But she's alive.
Yeah, yes, I believe so. I don't know. This is a pretty recent story, so I think it's just 2 or 3 years ago. And of course, the news don't actually care about what happens to families after. It's not a story anymore. So I don't know what happened for sure, but yeah, again, healthcare is the villain in real life for many of us.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, that's sort of like, I mean, that real life story, and also the Al Pacino's fake, Hollywood story, right? It's this idea that like the healthcare system backs you into a corner where you've got to do something wild.
Yeah, which it does often. I mean, we had a whole episode about like the crazy shit that we do to try and get the care we need to try and get out of medical debt situations. None of these were on our list, but any of us who's been through it or have friends or family who have can kind of understand how you end up there.
Yeah.
All right. So bringing this up a little bit more forward in time, the next kind of explosion of healthcare plots we saw comes in the 1990s and early 2000s. And what obviously was happening in the real world in the United States that was driving this kind of new wave of film and TV was when managed care is kind of launched as a supposed solution to high healthcare costs. And managed care plans just like spread like wildfire and kind of start replacing traditional insurance plans. Now, a lot of us have, managed care plans or PPO plans these days, but they were not the same back then when they were first introduced. This is when they first instituted things like needing pre-approval before you can get a procedure done, that your insurance company has to. But back then there was no protections or appeals processes. So an insurance company could deny you and you would literally have nothing you could do. And this was also when insurance plans, the managed care plans, were the first time that they started doing denials on sort of widespread basis. It's also when limited networks became very common. A lot of these early managed cares were sort of vertically integrated, where the insurance company owned the hospitals and the physician networks also. So you could only go to the providers that were owned by an insurance plan. And then they had kind of complete control over your life and your treatment and what you could get and what you couldn't get. And that led to this huge wave of organizing that the result of all this organizing was patient bills of rights in most states that kind of curbed some of this stuff, at least gave you an appeals process if your claim was denied or your pre-approval was not granted and it was just egregiously wrong. You could appeal internally in the insurance plan, and then you could usually appeal externally in the state. So it's not as extraordinarily bad as it is now as it was back then. But that would set off just kind of, a fire of people having horrible experiences, being denied care, not being able to access the care they get, even if they have insurance, which, as we know, if you're without insurance, you don't even have not lucky enough to have your care denied in the first place. So I think this kicked off a whole new wave of sort of Hollywood dramas and using these terrible experiences. And I think it seems like they're also a little more focused on the insurance plans at this stage, as opposed to like the provider plans, which was the earlier traumatic experiences that people were referring to and building on. Yeah. So Jillian, give us some like representative films from these, like 90s, early 2000s that start using health insurance villains as like the key plot points. And the one other thing I'll note from that time period was obviously the Clinton health reform that was not enacted, that kind of failed to pass in 1994, even when Democrats had the House, the Senate, and the presidency. I think probably created a sense of like hopelessness around Congress, like ever fixing or being able to fix these problems in the healthcare system. That, welcome to the dystopian healthcare system. But
yay. Oh, fantastic. Well, a lot of these actually were ones that our listeners pointed out.
Right.
And this one got quite a few mentions, so I'm going to talk about it. But I'm going to warn you that I find this movie to be terribly cringy. So, as good as it gets from 1997. What were you doing in 1997, Ben?
Oh my God. Why do you keep making me do math?
This is the year we graduated from high school.
All right. Okay. So I must have been, I mean, we're not exactly the same age, but around then I must have been starting at UMass Boston, starting undergrad at UMass Boston. I started as a non-degree student for a year and a half. I wasn't sure I actually wanted to go to college. And then so I must have been in my non-degree class taking phase at UMass Boston.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I was graduating high school again in suburban New Jersey, and I was about to go to school in New York City. So I was pretty New York obsessed as this time period.
Good timing.
As any Jersey girl should be. So all right. So this movie comes out, and it was tremendously popular, and it won a bunch of awards. And I just so okay. Here's the plot, right? You got Jack Nicholson, right, and he's playing this guy Melvin, who is like a total asshole. He's like cranky. He's bigoted. And in the film, this is all traced back to the fact that he suffers from obsessive compulsive disorder.
Okay.
This is a terrible depiction of obsessive compulsive disorder. This is not realistic. And that's really where the cringe comes in for me. And another place, though, is that this is the healthcare angle here. So Melvin, because he has obsessive compulsive disorder, and in this particular film, that means that he can only eat breakfast at one restaurant in New York City.
It's an expensive obsession.
Yeah. So, and in that restaurant, there is only one waitress, Helen Hunt, who will tolerate him, right? Now, Helen Hunt has a child who is now who has been diagnosed with cancer. Right. And so she's going to have to leave her job in order to take care of her kid with cancer. Basically, what ends up happening is that Jack Nicholson pays her kid's cancer bills, pays for her kid's treatment.
I see.
So that she can come back to work and serve him breakfast.
Which is, I mean, it's great to have your child's cancer care covered, but then to go back to Jack Nicholson serving Jack Nicholson breakfast is it's not the most inspiring outcome. But
it's not. And let me tell you, it really is a good illustration of the way that excuse me, is that the way that these systemic inequities, right, drive other inequities, right? So
yes.
this shitty health insurance system, right, creates this opening for Jack Nicholson to come in with his toxic masculinity and basically blackmail Helen Hunt into liking him.
Right. Women work in jobs less likely to give health insurance, like waitressing. That puts them in a position of dependency over men. Sounds like a great story to me.
Fantastic.
Way to go, 1990s.
Yeah. Oh my God. Another one that got mentioned from the 1990s on our from folks on our list is from 1998, Patch Adams.
Of course. Yeah. That's an actual healthcare movie, right? Yeah.
It is an actual healthcare movie. Gonna be honest with you, Ben. You can fire me now if you want, but I refuse to watch it.
Okay.
I mean, I was like a teenager when it came out, and even then I knew that it was stupid. And so I'm sorry, I just can't. It's too cheesy for me to rewatch.
Rest in peace, Robin Williams.
Sorry. Yeah, R.I.P.
Robin Williams, someone else who could be with us potentially with a good healthcare system. But who knows?
It's true. It's true. Yeah, that is true. Anyway, way to make this a downer, Ben.
Sorry.
This is supposed to be our light and fluffy episode.
Yeah, we picked the wrong genre, didn't we?
Oh, man. So thinking about like the long 1990s stretching into the early 2000s, right?
Mhm.
Another movie that got a lot of mentions from folks on our list was John Q from
Mhm. Mhm.
2002. Now,
I
I
actually
didn't.
remember this one. Yeah.
Do you really? I
Yes.
didn't see this when it came out, but I rewatched it over the weekend. I watched it over the
Mhm.
weekend, and it was pretty fabulous. I don't actually mean that. It's kind of a cheesy movie,
Mhm.
but it illustrates some important points about our healthcare system, right? So you might remember the plot of this, right? Is that Denzel Washington's a factory worker, and
Mhm.
he gets screwed by his workplace with his health insurance.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
first, they switch to a new HMO. This goes back
Mhm.
to what you were saying
Yeah.
about the HMO being the villain, and they institute tiered coverage, right?
Right.
But then they cut back his hours and reclassify him as a part-time employee,
Of course.
and that is what allows them to give him a terrible insurance plan that isn't going
Mhm.
to cover his son's heart transplant.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah. Now, the hospital is really not much better. And the hospital administrator in this is Anne Heche. Remember
Mhm.
Anne Heche? She
Yep.
was with
Yep.
Ellen for a long time. But basically, she says that they can't put Denzel's kid on the transplant list until they get a down payment. They're like,
Mhm.
your kid's been in the hospital for a while without us getting money from you, and our generosity has its limits.
That kid would be out of the hospital by today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. The wife at one point, Denzel's wife says to the administrator, I would tell you what you are, but I'm a Christian woman.
Great line.
Fantastic. Lots of family values in this.
Mhm.
And then so basically what Denzel does is he holds the ER hostage until they give his kid a new heart.
Mhm.
He brandishes a gun and he announces the hospital's under new management. From now on, free healthcare for everybody. How's that?
Amazing.
Yeah.
Did
So,
other people actually get healthcare in the
yeah,
film?
actually,
Oh, nice.
while he has the ER held
Uh-huh.
hostage, he actually does have them provide care to some other folks. It's nice.
He's onto something.
Yeah, he is onto something. Um, but so James Woods, who is an evil person in real life, he's a
Mhm.
Republican, right? In this, he plays the shitty doctor who defends the current system.
Right. Repeal the ACA.
Yeah, exactly. And this one, like, kind of bratty nurse points out that Denzel's son's heart problem actually could have been detected earlier, but because of the HMO plan, the doctors were getting bonuses for reducing the amount of testing that they do.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah, yeah.
I also like how we shouldn't forget the villainous role of employers also in the healthcare system, because
Yes.
the only reason HMO plans were spreading like wildfire is because employers were switching to them to save money on healthcare costs for themselves.
Yep.
Yeah.
Even in the movie, the representative from the factory where Denzel works says, "Yeah, it's a cheaper plan, but it looks like
Mhm.
there might be some issues." Oh, but I mean, the upshot of all this. I did also want to mention that there's a random patient in the ER whose name is Lester, and he's played by Eddie Griffin, who is a pretty funny fellow. And he describes what he calls the hypocritical oath that doctors take.
Okay. Uh-huh.
And he says I solemnly swear to take care of the sick and damn near dying as long as they've got major medical.
Uh-huh.
Uh,
Clever.
so I think that the film actually does portray doctors sort of as part of the villains here,
Mhm.
although I think from a bird's eye view, it's easy to see how they've become kind of pawns in this larger game.
Doctors did not benefit from HMOs. I'm positive of that.
Yeah, that's fair. But because of all this, Denzel becomes a folk hero, right?
Mhm.
And his kid gets a heart, and he doesn't have to kill himself to get the kid a heart, which is another plot point. But we can.
There's a happy ending to this one.
It is a happy ending. It's like a real happy ending, right? And so part of the reason that it's like a real happy ending is that in this particular fictional world, right? John Q's story changes the conversation about healthcare
Mhm.
in this country.
Wow.
And so the movie ends with like a montage of politicians like Hillary Clinton, pop culture figures. There's like Jay Leno and Nas. not Lil Nas, but Nas,
The OG.
the original, the OG,
Yeah.
talking about how we need healthcare reform, right? And there are shots of people who are marching in the streets for universal healthcare. They're wearing Jobs with Justice buttons, by the way, which is the organization that I worked with for many years in Massachusetts. And then Bill Maher is on screen, and Bill Maher. Again, someone who is a terrible person. But he says, the enemy we are searching for is us. We shot down universal health care. We are the ones who don't want our taxes raised.
Thanks, Bill. You're really not helping our cause at all.
Great. Thank you, Bill. So as per usual, Bill Maher makes a problematic statement, and Denzel Washington is a handsome folk hero. But it continues along that theme of Denzel getting, he gets backed into a corner by the system and has to lash out and do something to take control.
Right. Yeah. So this is, it seems like the plot is very similar, but kind of the arm of the healthcare industry that's the enemy changes over time, depending on how the healthcare industry is changing. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And it's funny, this is, of course, 2002 is well after the failure of the Clinton health reform. And I think the next kind of wave of change in the healthcare system after managed care and HMOs was happening, kind of the growth of for-profit entities, the rapid growth and this was already happening in the 1990s, of course. But we're talking about the growth of for-profit hospitals, for-profit physician networks, for-profit insurers, and more, like nursing homes are almost completely for-profit, dialysis clinics now. Just kind of the conversion of from nonprofit to commercially minded to fully for-profit with publicly traded board where you have literally investors who you're cutting off 10 to 15% of all your healthcare income to pay off your shareholders. And this around this time when we're talking about late 90s, right after this segment we're talking about, that's when we see the growth of the Medicare for All movement. Most state Medicare for All groups around the country were kind of launched in that phase, like late 1990s or so. And of course, Healthcare Now launched in 2004. So I think we start seeing a lot of organizing around this time. And there's also just crazy fast rising healthcare costs around this period. So growth of healthcare crisis paired with increasing social movement activism creates, yet another wave of films and TV. And at the same time that we see this kind of new wave of film and TV, we also see the lead up to the Affordable Care Act and Barack Obama's first presidency, where we again have this window where Democrats control House, Senate, presidency. And there's a question, will they be able to do anything, which they failed to do the last time around in the 90s.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And for me personally, this actually, this period sort of in the mid 2000s sort of coincided with my own health crisis.
Yeah. Me too. Yeah.
Right. And so I feel like we were getting sick right around this time, maybe developing some personal awareness of the system at the same time that that kind of awareness of the system was really spreading throughout culture. So in 2007, you had Sicko, of course,
right.
A movie we've talked about before on the show. And then in 2008, we had Breaking Bad.
Such a good show.
And I know we've talked about it a lot before, but I mean, basic plot line, right? Guy has to start meth empire because he can't get his cancer treatments paid for.
And he's a high school physics teacher who is very awkward, socially awkward, and has to start a criminal empire, basically.
Yeah, no, it's terrible. He's a chemistry teacher, by the way.
Chemistry. Sorry.
Yes.
That is way more helpful for making meth than so.
I may have watched that show a little bit too much. Also worth noting, the spinoff, Better Call Saul. A lot of it revolves around elder care. So that's an interesting.
Long-term care. Yes.
Long-term care. Yeah. But so Breaking Bad, definitely a great illustration of our the shittiness of our healthcare system.
Right.
Again, in that genre of like you back a man up against the wall and eventually he's going to lash out and do something crazy.
And I felt like they kept pulling out the healthcare card in that series too. Like season after season, he'd have like another round of payments coming due. He's like, all right, I'm going to get out of this finally. But then it's like, and he doesn't want to tell his wife about his, where he's getting all the money from. So he has to come up with stories. But anyway, carry on.
Yeah, no. It is definitely a recurring plot line for sure. All right. And then we have a movie from 2009, which I'd like to discuss in depth because I feel like it doesn't get the cultural attention it deserves. And that film is Saw 6.
What kind of cultural attention does Saw 6 deserve?
Okay, all right. So Saw 6, again, made right in the run-up to the Affordable Care Act, right? And I think, we'll talk about that in a second.
Saw was so cringy.
Oh my God.
Cringy.
Okay, I love the Saw movies.
I mean, it was just cringy. I mean, it's painful to watch. So hard to watch.
Oh, like, ouch, that guy's
from a horror
broken
perspective
in ways that I haven't seen before. Yeah. No, totally. I love horror movies. And like I said before, a revenge fantasy is my favorite kind of horror movie. So Saw 6 is a great combination of the two, plus with a healthcare angle. So it basically centers on this guy who's like a CEO at an evil insurance company called Umbrella Health. Which is actually kind of like a good insurance company name. I'm just surprised that someone hasn't actually tried to take that. I mean,
there's a traveler's insurance. They don't do health insurance, but they have the umbrella as their.
Well, this is Umbrella Health, right? And you may remember, so the Jigsaw Killer, you remember what his deal is, right? Yeah. He feels that people are not appreciative enough of their lives, and so he basically tests their will to live in the hopes of making them appreciate their lives. But so all of this comes out of his own personal experience as a cancer patient. And in Saw Part 6, we finally get to see his struggle with the insurance company to have his cancer treatment covered.
So I did not see Saw 6, but I saw 1. So this is basically telling us the backstory for Saws 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, right?
Yeah. The Jigsaw Killer actually dies in like the third one, and
so I see. Okay.
The rest of the series is all flashbacks.
Real throwback. Yeah. Okay.
But regardless, we get to see the Jigsaw Killer in a confrontation with this insurance CEO guy about his denied claims, right? And he says, "Do you know that in the Far East, people pay their doctors when they're healthy? When they're sick, they don't have to pay. So basically, they end up paying for what they want, not what they don't want."
I had a hard time following that.
The basic idea, right, is that we could restructure society in a way so that doctors would be rewarded for healthy patients and not for, again, they put doctors in here, but really what it means is the people who are paying out for these things, which is the insurance company.
All right. Let's not call that a value-based payment, though.
Fair. He also goes on this wonderful rant about politicians. He says they say the same things over and over again. Healthcare decisions should be made by doctors and their patients, not by the government. Well, now I know they're not made by doctors and their patients or by the government. They're made by the fucking insurance companies.
Oh my God. If that wasn't too long to put on a bumper sticker, that would be our new bumper sticker.
Indeed. Now, this is a very poorly written movie.
I could tell by the two examples you just gave us.
Yeah, not a lot of bumper sticker content, not a lot of really clear messaging, but still, a nice observation. right?
Mhm.
And you might remember, right, that there was this whole thing about, keep your government hands off my health care, and that was
Mhm.
part of the discourse at the time. But so Jigsaw says that because there's at Umbrella Health, there's a group of people that they call the dog pit.
Okay.
Those are 6 people who are like kind of specialists
Mhm.
in ways to finding new ways to deny claims.
Mhm.
So Jigsaw tells us that because of the dog pit, 2/3 of the claims for this insurance company are denied.
That's a really good medical loss ratio for the insurance company.
I mean, so
Barely any losses to that company.
in reality, that's a little unrealistic, though, right?
A little bit. I mean, I remember. I think in California, most states, you don't have to. Insurance companies don't have to report their denial rates, but I think managed care insurers do in California. My last memory was like Blue Cross California was approaching like 30%. 2/3 is that's movie denial rates, but we do see fucking crazy denial rates out there. So
yeah, it's enough. It's bad enough in real life for sure. So basically, the way that Jigsaw decides to get revenge, right, is to take this insurance executive and make him go face to face with people and tell them that they have to die.
Okay.
So he's put through a series of tortures where he has to take his employees basically and make decisions about which ones live or die. And there's one game in this where the dog pit, all 6 of them are like sort of rotating on a wheel, about to be shot by shotguns or whatever. And there's one underling who is like a total like exactly how I imagine like an insurance company bro. And he goes, according to the policy, I should be the one to live. Use the policy.
That is really excellent writing.
It's so funny. So
this is
funny.
taking revenge fantasy to like Tarantino levels, really.
Oh, it's amazing. And then, right, the final game, right? Sorry, again, I told you I wanted
I didn't know it was going to be this in depth.
Yeah, no. I told you there's not enough cultural attention paid to this. All right. So the final game, right? The CEO is basically put in an adjoining cage to a lady whose husband died of heart problems because the insurance guy canceled his policy. And she's there with her son in a cage with a lever that says live or die. And then he's in an adjacent cage, right? So the reason, by the way, for those who are keeping score with reasons for healthcare denial, so the husband's policy gets canceled because he failed to disclose a previous oral surgery on his application. And the insurance guy actually tries to make this claim. He says, oral surgery can cause scarring, and any kind of scarring can lead to heart disease. So that's his argument for why the insurance company shouldn't have to pay for his heart.
Clearly. I'm sure we've seen that one before.
Great. So the lady is there, and basically she's told by the Jigsaw killer that she now has the choice of whether to kill the insurance executive or let him live. And so she's about to kill him. And she says, the reason I'm doing this isn't because I can't forgive you for what you did to me. The reason I'm doing this is because I couldn't forgive myself for what you might do to someone else. You won't kill again.
Little on the nose there.
Oh, it's fantastic. In the end, actually, the son ends up killing the insurance executive, and the way he dies is spectacular. He basically gets his body shot through with acid, and it like disintegrates in the middle and falls apart into 2 halves.
Wow. Well, we know where the Squid Games genre came from, I guess, which is not that far off from this. It's just much, much better made.
But it is like, okay, think about it this way, though. When something is, when something is so prevalent in the culture that it filters down to B-rated horror movies franchises, right? that's when you know that that a conversation is really alive in our culture. And so it actually made me a little bit proud. I was thinking about it. I was thinking about like Breaking Bad, thinking about this, and I was like, we did so much protesting around the Affordable Care Act and pushing for healthcare reform and the public option and Medicare for all and all of that stuff. We brought that into the public sphere to the extent where it's showing up in shitty horror movies.
That's true. I think we can take credit for people legit seeing healthcare actors as villains, especially insurance companies and pharma. When people poll like, do you trust insurance companies? It's like under 20%. It's like nobody trusts them, and for very, very good reason. Same thing with pharmaceutical companies, although they got a little bit of a boost with the COVID vaccines. All right, so it's hard to follow up on Saw 6.
Cinematic genius.
We're just gonna jump into the present day, most recent, last 5 or 6 years, where it feels like tragedy and desperation in film is kind of increasingly revolving around characters' absolute inability to get the care they need or to afford paying for it. And we got a lot of submitted movie and TV shows around this just from like the most recent era. It does feel like we've hit a real period of healthcare dystopia, plateau in Hollywood.
Yeah, let's hope.
So let's
because
close
as
this
we
out.
know, it could get worse.
Oh, and in one of these films,
oh yeah.
it will get worse in the future.
Yeah. All right, so I wanted to talk about one that I think is a really good example of this idea of like this kind of helplessness or whatever. And it's one that folks might have seen because it's a little bit more recent. But it's the 2019 version of The Joker with Joaquin Phoenix.
Which was a very good movie. I completely forgotten a healthcare angle in this. I just remembered his acting.
He's a really good actor, right? Yeah, no, he was super awesome. And it was actually like a really well-made film. I thought the cinematography was gorgeous, etc. But I think, again, there was a healthcare angle that was sort of lurking underneath it. And specifically, you have to remember that that movie takes place in 1981. Right. So it's looking back to a different period in healthcare, but through a very contemporary lens. So if you might remember that 1980 saw one of the most devastating tragedies in our nation's history, which is that Ronald Reagan was elected president. And
a natural disaster of sorts.
A natural disaster, yeah. But so it was mourning in America. And that's what Ronald Reagan said, but mentally ill people had a different reaction. So basically, Jimmy Carter had put a lot of effort in the late part of the 70s into passing the Mental Health Systems Act, which would have increased federal funding for all different kinds of mental health care, including community health centers and social services, et cetera, et cetera. Reagan gets elected. And Jimmy Carter signs the act on his way out of office, and Reagan basically dismantles it on his way into office. Yeah, so by 1981, that entire, almost the entire Mental Health Systems Act was actually revoked by Reagan, and that meant that there was a tremendous lack of funding for community health services. So keep this in mind when I tell you about Arthur, the hero of the Joker.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I don't know. The protagonist of the Joker.
Yeah, better.
All right. So he's like a frustrated clown and an aspiring stand-up comedian. Which is sad enough as it is. But also he has a bunch of psychological problems. I'm really glad that they didn't pretend to give this like a real name or something like that. But he has a condition that causes him to laugh uncontrollably in inappropriate settings.
I think some of my relatives have that.
Yeah. No.
condition.
I mean, I definitely have that actually.
Right.
Yeah. Like people will tell me horrible stories and I'll just sort of giggle out of discomfort. But anyway.
Yes.
Or sometimes I'll be telling a joke in my own head while other people are talking. That happens. Regardless, this is apparently an endemic problem for him, and so he's taken like 7 medications to try to control his issues, which he gets from this social services office. And he's seeing a therapist there too, right? So he's doing poorly in his life though, right? And at some point he ends up on a subway with these like bros from Wayne Enterprises. You'll recall that's Batman's father's company.
Right. Yep.
And that starts a fight, and it ends with him shooting the bros on the subway. And this creates a crazy, kind of unfolding of events that include riots and political conflict, et cetera, et cetera. So here's this guy, right? He's just done something terrible, and he goes to seek out some mental health care, right? But when he goes in to this social worker, she tells him that Gotham has actually cut social services from its budget. And so the social worker tells the Joker that the city doesn't give a fuck about people like him, that is to say mentally ill people, or people like her, she's Black. And she tells him that now he can't get those 7 prescription drugs he's taking. And that's when things start to go really far down.
Yep. With Single Pair, not only would we lack all these great movies, but Batman might not even exist.
Exactly.
Be out of a job, twiddling his thumbs, rolling around in his riches.
Yeah. So, I mean, in this particular, this struck me as a particularly 2023 version of the Joker, right? Where it's like about like awareness of mental health and that kind of thing. But yeah, all of this unwinds, of course, until he's on national TV and he says, "What do you get when you cross a mentally ill loner with a society who abandons him and treats him like trash? You get what you deserve." And then he shoots the late night talk show host. Wow. So is that what is deserved? I don't know. But okay, no, I know no one deserves to be shot in the head. But that being said, I think it does actually a really good job of setting up like the kind of systemic injustice that leads to people, kind of being in extreme situations where they feel that kind of hopelessness.
Our healthcare system is so bad, it can make you kind of sympathize with the worst villain.
I think that's it. No, that's exactly it, right? All of a sudden, the Joker, who is again a pretty fucked up guy, you're like,
oh yeah, I kind of get that. Yeah, I've been there, done that.
Yeah, I've also had trouble refilling my psych meds, so relatable content from the Joker. So I think that's a good one, and actually a really good movie. I thought so.
Yeah, that was highly acclaimed.
It was highly acclaimed. It's true. And then here's a film that has not been so highly acclaimed, but is very current, and I think it might actually still be in theaters now. Okay. Regardless, it's not available on streaming services yet. But it's the movie 65. Now, I confess, I actually not even heard of this, but our researcher, Sophia. Our researcher, Sophia, found this one. And I have to say, it's amazing. So this is what Sophia has to say, right? So 65 million years ago, the only 2 survivors of a spaceship from Samaras that crash landed on Earth must fend off dinosaurs and reach the escape vessel in time before an imminent asteroid strike threatens to destroy the planet. Okay, that actually, I think, is the description from Letterboxd. Here was Sophia's commentary.
Okay.
All right. This one is crazy because Adam Driver lives on an alien planet, and the inciting incident is that he has to take a job to pay for his sick daughter's medical bills. That requires him to travel to planet Earth 65 million years ago. So there are dinos and time travel, but still somehow for-profit healthcare. Right.
Well, Adam Driver, so it's going to be at least a respectable film. This is not going to be like just independent film. I mean, he's a real actor, right?
You're an Adam Driver stan? Come on, man.
No, but they must have been able to pay him and stuff. I love this one because it's actually a futuristic film, right? set where humans are living out in space. We have mastered time with space travel and international living
and time travel.
But we still don't have a fucking universal healthcare system.
Oh, so depressing.
Yeah.
It really shows you something about the way that our healthcare system has limited human imagination.
Yeah, and our political system in the United States. It's just like total desperation.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So we've run kind of long on this one, Jillian. So why don't we
so
try
much
to
fun.
wrap
I haven't
here?
noticed.
It's true. But let's wrap up nonetheless. I'm just a little curious because we do a lot of storytelling training for folks, activists. We teach them how to tell their own personal story. And it's not completely different from the type of storytelling that, Hollywood scriptwriters do. Is there like any, in your mind, any connection between the two? Any like lessons to be learned here for movement setting?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the first thing to note is that a lot of these stories focus on individuals. And, the reason for that is because Hollywood loves individuals and stories about, that one person who takes on the system. And we know that what really changes our healthcare system, though, is actually collective action.
Right.
It's much less sexy to make a film about a group of healthcare activists who come together and organize in their committee in order to have a municipal resolution passed saying that we need Medicare for all.
And aside from John Q, I will say most of these lone gunmen, things do not go well.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. So there are some cautionary tales there,
right?
Don't end up like Joker or like Al Pacino in Dog Day Afternoon. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I don't know. What do you think, Ben? What are you?
Yeah, I think there is a danger in kind of letting Hollywood shape the narrative of our healthcare system too. Well, the narrative of almost anything really. I think just like what you were saying, it's like, well, you have to be driven to sort of drastic action. And we've talked about this, like the crazy shit that we all have to do when we're trying to get access to healthcare. But I don't think we should rely on Hollywood to kind of shape the healthcare narrative, to choose who gets to be the villains and who don't get to be the villains. Kind of what the reality of life in healthcare in America is these days. So I do think all the more important for our own storytelling narrative, which, if done well, and if our organizing is done well, will kind of pierce the both the media, but also just sort of cultural consciousness, I think. And actually, I do think a lot of this Hollywood stuff is actually driven from the bottom-up narrative work that we do. So, yeah, I think the storytelling stuff that we do as a movement is even more important, given the really weird shit in Hollywood, but all driven by the same problems in the healthcare system. So,
yes. So The Fugitive is an important depiction of our healthcare system, but your own experiences are much more important, and we want to hear those too.
Right, especially if you're a one-armed man. And then
shout out to all
yes. All right. So I want to, and also I'll give it a quick shout out. Every other month now, we do a telling your story, telling your healthcare story training. So you can get in on that anytime you want at our website, healthcare-now.org. I want to thank our podcast team. Podcast manager is Angelique Davis, our researcher for this episode, who did a phenomenal job, Sophia Simeon. Our show notes writer was Jerry Katz, and our audio editor was Christian Brandt. Thank you so much to the podcast team. And don't forget to like this episode, subscribe to the Medicare for All podcast on your favorite podcast platform. And I should tell you, this is a project of the Healthcare Now Education Fund. So if you want to support our work, you can donate on our website. Same place you can get that storytelling training, healthcare-now.org. Thanks so much, everyone. We will see you in a couple of weeks. Bye-bye.
Stay safe.